Mr. and Mrs. Smith is Donald Glover's best body of work. Let me explain why. Now, before somebody says Atlanta, before somebody even goes and says Swarm, right? Like Mr. and Mrs. Smith, for it to have been the movie that it was, like this show has the most range I've ever seen in my life, coming from him. Now, there have been better shows, yes, but Mr. and Mrs. Smith, and again, just full transparency, for Donald Glover, who I think is a phenomenal like writer and producer, to see him act in this, the range is just like amazing, bro. Like absolutely amazing. The show, as somebody who I'm not really the biggest like Amazon person when it comes to shows, I think they completely botched Reacher. There's been other shows I've watched. I'm like, how do you like tank this? Like, Reacher was one of them, and like Jack Ryan, just like no, like how do y'all ruin this? But Mr. and Mrs. Smith, the way that it started is not the way that it finishes, and it's also not the way that you get like into the dialogue and the development of the characters. But Donald Glover, for me specifically, coming from like an Atlanta fan, as a 30 Rock fan, like for him, this show is like that transition period where it's like, oh, I can believe this character. And they didn't go and make him put on 30, 40 pounds of weight. They didn't make him go and, all of a sudden, like, just be super muscular. He's who he is. And I value that about, like, TV shows, compared to, like, Reacher. When I saw the movie, like, Jack Reacher, and then I saw I think it's Never Look Back, for the sequel of that one. I was like, okay, Tom Cruise, like, he's every bit of what, like 5'7", 5'8". The issue with that movie is, again, like when they did the show, they were even giving the actor on that show hell because he's only 6'2" and the character is written to be 6'5". Like Mr. and Mrs. Smith, it doesn't matter for Donald Glover, and I understand the dynamic that they took to make it a little bit different, right? But Donald Glover's character in the film, and he's not the only person carrying this film by any means, right? The female lead as well is good. Like everything is good about the show to me. But here's why I think people should actually, just talking about Donald Glover here, and I'll talk about the female actress as well because I think she's really good. And I've gone and started to watch like things that she's been in previously. But with Donald Glover, like the range is just there. And I have to correct myself. I said 30 Rock, I meant Community. I know somebody gonna say something in the comments, but you know what I meant, right? But ultimately, when it comes to him, just as like an actor, I think he's been kind of put in that comedic bubble where he's just who he is, right? But this one is one of those like moments in the show where you're like, oh, I didn't think he was going to do this. And I think I can actually end the video by just saying that I didn't think he had this in him. And shout out to Donald Glover. Yes, you have it in you. I'm really anticipating season 2. I'm actually kind of mad that I'm almost done with season 1. But when I see like people, I'm starting to just praise them because of the fact that it's like, oh, like we don't get good shows often, and when we do, they cancel them, right? And I think they're on a really good platform. I think that the show itself is really good. The premise is really good. It's different. But ultimately, just seeing the interaction and the chemistry of him and the female lead is just amazing. So I want to just give my kudos and shout outs to them. I think it's a really good work of art. This is not like a review because, again, like it's all interpretive, but I've really enjoyed Mr. and Mrs. Smith. I really have. And again, coming from Atlanta, and I know how we all feel about that show. Like that's just in our hearts forever. But Mr. and Mrs. Smith, like it's up there for me. It like there are shows like that you're like, okay, like what would I compare it to? If I compared it, I would think like Quantico. I would think, God, I cannot remember the show. Um, that was, God, I cannot remember. It was like a smaller show that was based in Georgetown, and it was about like a secret spy, right? And he was actually in a room, and he answered a call, and the show just went from there. And if you know it, let me know in the comments. But Mr. and Mrs. Smith, what's special about it to me is it doesn't drag shit. It just makes the show what it is. And even if you think it's predictable, it has a twist in you like wasn't expecting that. So if you haven't seen Mr. and Mrs. Smith, I would definitely advise you go and just go check it out, man. Like If it's not your vibe or something like that, at least give it the first episode. The first episode means a whole lot to the show. And if you like it, and you continue on to episode 2, episode 3. But I've rarely seen shows. It's like, all right, I know in the first episode, I'm like, yeah, this is my jam. So again, shout out to Donald Glover, shout out to Amazon, shout out to just everybody who was a part of this show with Mr. and Mrs. Smith. Should even shout out to the movie because this actually makes me want to go watch the movie again because the character development there was good and they had to build quick. It was like a 90-plus minute movie where it's like, all right, cool, like we need you to check all these boxes now. This is like we're able to build, and I love that so much. So shout out to them.